I was having a conversation recently with Dr. Meinhard Haslecker, who's the head of CMC at Sodio. He's going to join me, by the way, on next month's Bioprocess Online Live. We're going to talk about early process considerations for novel protein therapeutics. But he and I were, so Sodio is working on an ADC, and we were having a discussion about his role as head of CMC at Sodio. And he was telling me that it's as much, if not more, logistics and coordination, really, than, you know, working on sort of the traditional CMC package that head of CMC would have been responsible for in an antibody, you know, manufacturing environment, which is just mind-boggling to me. Not only have there been incredible innovations and changes in terms of the modality, but also the role of a head of CMC. It's you've got to be willing to embrace that. And I want to talk about CMC a little bit. I want to talk about how the complexity of ADC manufacturing impacts the CMC element of the IND in terms of a few different perspectives. I want to start with written procedures, methods, and specifications. Sandra, since you're on my screen right now, we'll start with you. There are a number of kind of boxes that I want to check as we talk about sort of that early, the CMC work, but that's where I'd like to start.
Great.
With your experience, with your experience in the space and what you're doing now, how would you sort of characterize that?
Yeah, so I think I'll share a few comments to start with. I mean, whether it's an ADC or an antibody, I mean, you're ensuring that you can supply, your process is capable of supplying your clinical trial material as you're pushing to get, you know, your IND filed. You want to go rapidly. You know, to first in human studies. CMC is almost always on the critical path. And, you know, until you've shown proof of concept, you really want to try to minimize your spend. So what this means is that typically you have pretty limited process history and data to finalize your process, your manufacturing specs, and there's still multiple things that you don't know. You know, what's the dose, may not know all the indications you want to go after, ultimately the size of the market, yields, process variability, probably not very well understood at the time that you're filing your IND. So, I mean, those are sort of basic, but, you know, back to your question about for ADCs and how the ADC complexity impacts your early IND process. You know, it's really not so much about the antibody component or the conjugation or the linker payload. It's really that all of these elements need to come together and be thought about as you're preparing your IND. And Matt, if I can just take 1 minute to talk about you know, this system that we've been describing as a complex sort of ADC supply chain. When I think about a manufacturing operation, I think, you know, there is really 5 core elements. You have your equipment in your facilities, you have your process and analytical technology, you have your sort of core technical operating systems like your quality management system, you have your management structures, and then you have your people and sort of the culture in the middle. And these 5 core elements all form a complex kind of unified whole. And for a manufacturing system to perform well, there needs to be sort of a level of internal consistency. So one part of that system that's not consistent with the other elements could actually cause the system to fail. So for an ADC, what you're talking about are multiple systems all coming together to form a larger complex system that you need to keep your eye on and think about as you're setting specifications. So if you set a specification for a manufacturing system that the equipment hasn't been designed to reliably maintain, it's going to be a problem. If you're designing a quality management system that's not really well suited for a large complex system of multiple CDMOs, it can also not serve you well. So again, the whole point is, as you're writing your early specifications and procedures, thinking at a system level about this larger whole that you're operating within. So that would be my sort of a starting point.
Yeah, very, very good. Amy, thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's definitely, that's really good advice as far as thinking about it as a system. And I do think that I mean, maybe just a couple of things I'll add on. One is the expertise. I think a lot of us, like me, I spent most of my time on small molecules. And so I think when I think about small molecules and about drug development, small molecules, you have a certain, certain level of testing and manufacturing that you do. And then with antibodies, you have a certain amount of manufacturing and bioassays. And so you really need expertise in both of those to build an ADC. And that's not super common yet. So finding experts that can think about small molecules and large molecules, thinking about the bioassays and the complexity and understanding the supply chain. I think that if people are out there thinking about ADCs, it's not just, oh, get a CDMO, they can do everything. You need experts in a lot of different areas. So yeah. I'll stop.
Yeah. Joe, what are your reflections on that? I'm curious, like I said, given your perspective, you see the comings and goings of a lot of these early stage companies. Can you, I mean, would you draw direct lines to sort of early stage CMC? Would you draw direct lines from early stage CMC to success and or failure?
Yeah,
I mean, maybe
strongly,
that might be putting too fine a point on it, but you get what I'm saying, right?
I do. I think it is becoming very valued, and I think I'm glad we got to a point where a lot of companies and innovators are bringing CDMOs with an S on board really early on in the process, because I think there was some learning historically. If you do bring them when you're getting ready to go to phase 1 or phase 2 or whatever, or you're trying to do things in-house first, even if you're trying to do things in-house first, at the preclinical and discovery, you're going to face big struggles and hurdles if you don't engage with CDMOs and have very early conversations about, okay, what are your capabilities and how can we work together to set ourselves up for success in a couple of years. I think a lot of companies have not done that historically, and they have faced issues or delays. I think there was a question on panel where, what are the 3 things, not panel, sorry, the audience, like what are the 3 things that could impact timeline big time? Well, that's one of them. CDMOs have a big backlog, especially the CDMO that is trying to work on ADCs and small molecules and antibodies and cell and gene therapy, and they don't have the expertise as well, right? So what Amy and Sandra are both saying, maybe on LinkedIn, you see, a lot of ADC researchers, scientists, but that is, in general, there are expertise, but there are no expertise for what Amy is trying to achieve, what Sandra is trying to achieve, because of the innovation. Every company is doing it very differently, and that needs a lot of expertise. I think one topic that is like the diversification and the unstructured or engaging with a couple of CDMOs, I think there's something that is unspoken today is, you assume that you're working with CDMOs in the same country, but that is not the case. You're working with CDMOs across the globe. So imagine you're trying to, in your small molecule or antibody where expertise are, abundant, you're working in the same country and trying to deal with that timeline and this closed system working properly. Take that up to a big global scale and try to manage that, right? I mean, that you're talking about a global scale, and then you're seeing a lot of outsourcing of ADC manufacturing as well. You go to Australia, there are a lot of incentives in Australia to manufacture there, but they don't potentially have all the capabilities, right? Or you want to run your trials in Australia, and then, but my fill and finish is actually in Germany. So like, how do I even coordinate that, and which stage? I think the last thing I want to touch on is the cost that both Amy and Sandra brought up. It is very expensive today to manufacture an ADC. You can't say it is a small molecule and that's my cost, and it's an antibody and that's my cost, and I can put them together and my cost is 1 + 1. That is not the case. It is very expensive, and then you can imagine, I mean, some estimates out there, and from my conversations with C-suite of companies, ADC companies, they sometimes put the operating cost of ADC manufacturing at 90%. You're spending 90% of your money on operating costs. That includes labor, supplies, facility expenses. That is not cheap at all. And then take that up, a couple of million per small dose. And, that is not easy. And I mean, kudos to every ADC innovator out there. It's nice to watch it. And, you're not doing it like Amy and Sandra on a daily basis and dealing with the headache, but that is a big take, the big thing to take on to go jump into space.
Yeah, that's a good segue to an audience question that we entertained during the registration process. So when our audience members register, we ask them, what do you want to learn? And we get a big list of things, statements, or sometimes more specific questions. And Cookie asked the question, what are the bottlenecks or rate limiting steps and most cost sensitive components of ADC CMC? So Joe, you just reflected on that, but I want to turn that question to Amy and Sandra. Sandra, you referenced cost a little bit earlier when you were sharing. Can you share any specifics on like what are the most expensive aspects of CMC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as you're really trying to rapidly go to IND, first in human studies. It's really about balancing speed with the timeline, and of course keeping your risk at an acceptable level. I think the bottleneck. So of course, the CMC is always, as I said, almost always on the critical path, and the costs initially for the first, let's say 3-4 months while you're doing cell line development and getting some of your early sort of process development work underway and analytics are not so high. It's really once you start committing to slots, your engineering run, your at scale GMP run. And again, one of the strategies that we've used with our CDMO is to be able to gate, some of that spending so that you're moving to the next decision point without having committed the full spend. We also, I think it's important to think about, again, capacity and sort of raw material supply shortages, and the ability to move quickly is often about booking slots or reserving slots in advance, but also stockpiling raw materials so that they don't become rate limiting, and that costs. So again, it's all about balancing. I don't think there's one answer here, but it's really about knowing there's a balance between going fast and cost, and then balancing the risk.
Yeah. I want to get to another audience question here real quick that's related. Lacan asked, what are the key challenges you need to address during tech transfer to your CDMO? How does this impact the timing to start the interactions with CDMOs? Amy, do you want to maybe tackle that one first? Key challenges you need to address during your tech transfer to your CDMO.
Yeah, that's not really my area. I don't think I can really address that.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. Sandra, you want to take a crack at it, or we can always get back to Lacan.
Well, no, I would offer that I think what's important is that I don't think you can start too early planning your sort of manufacturing strategy, including the tech transfer component, and really running out on paper kind of the plan. You can do a lot well before you start spending. So to have a really good understanding of, again, thinking about our system with the different elements, how this is going to sort of be built out over the coming sort of 1 to 2 years. I think I would say that getting the relationship up front, getting it set. So first of all, picking the right partner where there's a good fit, they've got the right, let's say, commitment to quality, to flexibility. Cost is generally not the most important factor. But being able to start building those relationships at all levels in the CDMO. You don't want the first time your CEO is talking to the CDMO CEO when you're in the midst of a crisis. So starting early and building those relationships, I think will allow you to figure out where you can go fast, where you need to slow down, and make sure that you're not, building in risks that you haven't really thought through in partnership with your CDMO. I think that's really a step that is often, again, underappreciated in the early planning stages.
Okay. I want to get back to my checklist of CMC elements of the IND. The next one on my... Joe, you may, absolutely.
I was just going to add one thing, which is, I think this is a recent conversation about, CDMO. So CDMOs located in China and Chinese entity are playing a big role in ADC manufacturing and services today. It will be interesting to see how that will play out in the next couple of years, because that will impact tech transfer and IP, et cetera, that is coming up. So that could potentially become a hurdle if things continue the way they are continuing in terms of limitation with companies in China manufacturing ADC companies for, let's say US for now, but US companies, US innovators.